Well, suffice it to say, I never got out of woolen gym. So what a pleasure it is to be here. Feels like a homecoming. I know some of you well and a few of you a little bit. I spent a good bit of my life in this general environment and learned so much here at a time when I needed to learn a lot because I was very young in my work here, and some of you were kind enough to lead me astray from time to time. And little did I suspect when I made my first pilgrimage to Rose Hill, as all young leaders in the community college system were expected to sit on the porch and be handed many mimeographed and Xeroxed copies of articles and classical texts to be recited before the great Dallas Herring. Little did I imagine then that I would be giving a talk named for him. He was a dramatic persona. I remember getting out of the car. I think it was a Chrysler K car made of compressed rust, and wandering onto the porch and being greeted by this gentleman with the dramatic eye patch and the unlit pipe, and speaking always in complete and grammatically correct sentences, unlike any college president I'd ever met. Little did I know someday I'd still be able to speak into his legacy, and it's such an honor to do so. I do want to speak to you about college transfer. The transfer of academic credit, as all of you know, from community colleges to universities has been a feature of the American higher education system since the founding of the first junior colleges in the early 20th century. Originally conceived as a mechanism for expanding access to students of academic promise to elite institutions such as the University of Chicago, the model was a central design principle for two-year colleges during the great building boom of the open-door institutions throughout the post-war years and then their massive expansion in the 60s and 70s. Robert Maynard Hutchins himself quoted Jefferson when he made the case for the first junior college in Illinois, at Joliet, that geniuses would be raked from the coals. Mind you, only the geniuses would, but nevertheless. The development of the Associate of Arts degree and articulation of programs across institutions and statewide common course numbering systems and all sorts of other mechanisms that created portability of credit and massification of higher education have been uniquely American contributions to higher education in the world, and this is celebrated around the world perhaps more than it is here. So, that being the case, why is the system in need of redesign? I would make this case. The first is scale. As the needs of society have changed, and program mixes across higher education have evolved to meet those changing demands, transfer as a feature of the systems of an American college student's experience has grown remarkably in scale and importance, as have community colleges generally in the higher education spectrum. I needn't remind you in North Carolina that colleges have come from different roots, even within the state, and that their sense of identity might be a little more attached to transfer or a little more attached to workforce education, depending on where the college grew up and when. But across the country, all 1,100 colleges bear the same features. All have both applied degrees and academic degrees. All focus on workforce placement and transfer for the completion of bachelor's degrees. So convergent evolution has done its job on us. So you will not find a community college in the country that hasn't found a way to create a college transfer curriculum, articulation of credit, those sorts of things, even from the most technical of backgrounds. And as a result, community colleges now enroll 41% of all American undergraduates. Perhaps much more significantly, and a little more surprising, 45% of all bachelor's degrees awarded in America contain credit transferred from an American community college. 45% of all bachelor's degrees involved transfer. Clearly, this is no longer an alternative. This is the major on-ramp to higher education in America for a bachelor's degree, not just for an associate's. It's as the dominant mode in our own community, for example. We represent now a 60% market share for all freshmen, all high school students who graduate from the 10th largest school district in America and go to college anyway. 2/3 come to Valencia. That's a dominant role. And with more students beginning their education in community colleges than in the independent colleges, more than in the public universities, more than in the proprietary schools, clearly transfer is an enormous and important feature of the undergraduate education in America and worthy of attention. Now, in today's climate, the effectiveness and impact of college transfer programs is more important than ever, and the reasons are several. As is widely reported and discussed, the cost of higher education, especially the cost of a traditional bachelor's degree, has become a serious source of criticism in our industry and a serious barrier, both real and perceived, to potential students. I needn't go into detail on this. You know the story, and you know how sometimes the press coverage of this suffers from a little conflation of data. So the cost of higher education depends. Nevertheless, in the public mind, it is a huge, huge issue. Similarly, the run-up in debt that followed 3 decades of price increases that were double the rate of inflation and now comprise almost $1.5 trillion in student debt is a matter of serious public concern. Without a lot of discernment between the kinds of institutions, the level of depth, the type of degree pursued, and so on. Nevertheless, an issue. And it is an issue for those who graduate with debt, and even more so, those who fail to graduate, yet with debt. And there are many thousands of these refugees, toxic refugees from higher education, unservable while in default, with no good solution to that dilemma. Clearly, their dreams are deferred. These challenges have emerged at precisely the time our systems are being called on to provide a new stream of talent to rapidly changing economies and jobs in the face of generational shortages of skilled workers, and with skills that are higher and have a shorter half-life than ever before. The technologists and professionals required by a thriving society will have to come from a more effective and productive higher education system, preparing a population heavily based, more heavily than ever, on first-generation students to meet these needs, and with many more of them earning credentials of market value, including industry certifications, applied associate degrees, and bachelor's degrees, all of the above. And I think North Carolina is to be commended for having set bold goals for the delivery of credentials of value to a much deeper segment of the population. It's important in that not to underestimate the continuing, in fact, the increasing value of the bachelor's degree as durable occupations skill up. In a recent report, in fact, Carnival's most recent report, researchers noted, and I want to quote a little bit at length from this, as the workforce has upskilled, the likelihood of having a good job has favored workers with a bachelor's degree or higher. Among whites, blacks, and Latinos, workers with more education fared better than those with less education. At the same time, the gaps in good jobs by race and ethnicity have generally persisted at every level of education. They go on to state that this is a design feature of our higher education systems. The history of racial injustice in the United States has combined with structural economic change favoring highly educated workers to amplify the advantages held by white workers over black and Latino workers. I want to pause there to let that soak in. The crux of my argument for transfer as a vital issue for us to redesign is that our society won't work if we don't. Put simply, this is a strong charge, and it's not one to be ignored, especially in a state that ranks near the bottom in economic mobility and whose higher education system has been strongly shaped by just those historical factors I mentioned. You will not find another state where nearly half of the public institutions offering bachelor's degrees are HBCUs. You will not find another state that chose as its legal strategy in the face of accusations of discrimination in the mid-20th century to consolidate the institutions and the data into a single institution. An interesting pivot that ossified the design flaw into the system. It makes it very difficult to overcome now, decades later. The higher education systems across the country and the economy with which it's intertwined have failed to deliver the kind of social and economic opportunity and mobility that we once promised, especially to the bottom quintiles of earners and to people of color who are overrepresented in these strata. Delivering real opportunity, rebuilding the middle class may be the most important challenge facing higher education. And I will argue dramatic improvements in the transfer ecosystem will be required. In fact, they may be the only way to meet those challenges. This view is based on the remarkable, astonishing diversity of the community college student population. Economic diversity, ethnic diversity, racial diversity, linguistic, social, national, art, every kind of diversity imaginable exists in the community college population at roughly twice the rate of any other higher education sector. Not only do community colleges enroll 41% of all undergraduates, they enroll 56% of Native Americans, 57% of Hispanics, and 52% of African Americans pursuing undergraduate studies. Remember, all the other half are divided among public four-year and plus, independent colleges, and for-profits. So we are the plurality population, if you want to think of it that way. And this pattern is growing rapidly. Since 1995, more than 80% of new white undergraduate enrollments have gone to the 468 most selective colleges, while community colleges have enrolled 72% of new Hispanic students and 68% of new African American students. So what about low-income students? Well, this is late breaking. This is a report released this week by the American Council on Education, defining low-income students as those who earn less than 150% of the poverty level, which for a family of four currently is about $38,600 a year. In 1996, about a third of all students and undergraduate students in higher education in America were low income. That number dropped rather significantly from 2000 to 2007, and then rose again. So from 2000 to 2016, we went from 26% of the population that we serve as undergraduates being low income to 43%. 43% of American undergraduates are low income. But if you break that out by ethnicity, by race, you get a completely different picture, or maybe the same picture in bolder relief. For black students, 59.8% were low income. For Hispanic, 52.9%. For white, 33.6%. My point is, the social justice agenda, the opportunity agenda, depends on what John Dillinger drew as his principle of crime. When asked why he robbed banks, he said, that's because that's where the money is. Efforts to diversify the freshman classes of selective institutions have largely failed. They're not scalable, and they never have been. The only opportunity I see that's scalable for the country is to find a way to make transfer work. Surely, a model that reduces debt and cost that can bring remarkable diversity into higher education, and the opportunity for economic and social mobility that it ought to be able to promise should be an important part of the solution to the challenges higher education is facing. And the good news is the students agree. Among this amazingly diverse class of new students at community colleges, more than 80% say they desire ultimately to transfer and earn a bachelor's degree. We have a bad habit in higher education of thinking of our students as irrational and foolish children. They are rational consumers. They know the data at some level as well as we. The problem is only 15% ever make it. The question of graduation rates through transfer compared to native students is complex, and many studies have documented the phenomenon and at different rates. I've found rates from good research that range from 26% disparities to 30% disparities to no disparity. Depends on your methodology and where you studied, I suppose. But even if there are huge disparities between transfer graduation rates once they reach the university and native students, it doesn't necessarily mean those students should have started at the university. So, these are not the same students. Propensity score matching studies make that quite clear. And perhaps the most comprehensive approach to these questions, Monaghan and Attewell found that when propensity score matched, community college entrants in comparison to four-year college entrants were, number one, no different in final cumulative GPA. Number two, 5.5 percentage points more likely to enroll in remedial language courses at the beginning of their program, 19 percentage points more likely to have to enroll in remedial math, 10 percentage points more likely to stop out within 6 years, 9 percentage points more likely to drop out by spring of year 3, and much more likely to be working and to be working longer hours. Nevertheless, they graduated at nearly the same rates. They did find this. Only 42% of BA-seeking students at community colleges actually transfer within 6 years. Oddly, 13% of those who said they weren't seeking a BA managed to transfer. Most strikingly, only 60% of the community college students who earned 60 credits at a community college and said they intended to transfer, only 60% had transferred within 6 years, leading the authors to comment, evidently, many relatively academically successful community college students failed to transfer to a four-year college. Here's the reason to redesign the transfer ecosystem. Within the existing model are the students who have chosen a more affordable pathway, one that reduces the need for debt, one that can provide the education and credential they require for economic and social mobility. But relatively few will achieve this goal in the system as designed. If the oft-quoted principle that every system is perfectly designed to achieve the results it routinely gets is true, then we have a system redesign issue. In fact, competing theories for this low performance and its solution don't stand up. The most traditional formulation is that these students just aren't college material. But clearly, many are succeeding in college but failing to transfer and graduate. A second argument is the problem lies in poor quality in the community colleges. How is it then that 45% of the graduates with bachelor's degrees have community college backgrounds? And again, the propensity score matching suggests that the transfer students succeed at rates very similar to students like them who began at four-year colleges. No, the most promising course of action is to review a system that has changed only marginally, if at all, in 50 years. A system that, in some ways, held hostage to the self-interests and biases of siloed institutions, the interests of the students, and that reproduces, unfortunately, socioeconomic inequities that it was intended to muddle. Yet, if tuned properly, could yield hundreds of thousands of degree earners without major new infrastructure investments. So I want to call us to a design project. And every good design project begins with design principles. What is it you're designing for? I have a handful to share with you. The first principle is end-to-end design. Most institutions, both sending and receiving, treat transfer as a transaction. It begins with an application for transfer, and it ends with the successful registration of the transfer student. Simply redesigning and tuning the transaction won't address the problem. Transfer begins with the discernment and declaration of a transfer goal as early as possible in a student's experience within the community college, and it culminates only in the successful graduation from the receiving institution and whatever may follow that. To see the whole process and design it from one end to the other is essential to the project. The entire pathway must be considered in design. Alignment of curriculum, frequent audit of the student's progress, and interventions for off-plan diversion, co-curricular preparation for the transition, thoughtful induction of the transfer student into the life of the receiving institution, attention to the transfer shock phenomenon, and regular measurement of the effectiveness of the system as a core mission. These are all little elements that would go into this end-to-end design. The kind of attention to transfer as an end-to-end process will, in turn, require a different organizational structure and focus. Busy enrollment management staff are unlikely to be able to give this kind of attention to transfer. In most cases, the vast majority of transfers matriculate to a relatively small number of very local universities. Creating a super-structured organization from the staffs of the participating institutions, a real consortium with real staff and tools, a clear agenda, and specific goals to be achieved in transfer with accountability to the senior leadership of both institutions. This is what's warranted. We need to build transfer consortia that have teeth and purpose and public accountability. This is the kind of organizational attention contemplated in the recently published Transfer Playbook from the Aspen Institute. When transfer success finds its way into the strategic goals and organizational structure of the partnering institutions, of both of them, real progress can be made. End-to-end design. Second is change the value proposition to the student. All of our conversations are about ourselves. There's a wonderful Zen poem that I've heard David White read. It says, "Why are you so unhappy? Why are you so unhappy? Because 98% of everything you say and all that you do is about yourself, and there isn't one." A Zen view. Is there an institution more self-absorbed than a college or a university? I doubt it. And we respond in our silos to a set of conditions, rewards, expectations that are highly siloed to begin with. They're hard to break out of. And one of those is, it's about us, baby. No, it's about the students. In most cases, the value proposition, the promise we make to a student who's thinking about transfer, goes something like this. If you can't attend a university for some reason or another, try your local community college. If you're successful, some of that credit will transfer somewhere. And you may someday earn a bachelor's degree somewhere. That's what we can promise. No wonder they don't do it. I wouldn't take anybody up on that promise. And in most states, if you look carefully at the first page of the new student website, where they're giving advice. I did this today for 4 universities in the UNC system. I did them alphabetically, so I just started with Appalachian State. The first statement it makes is, some people do this. Some even earn a degree first, but you don't have to. I was encouraged. The promise is accurate, but it's no value proposition at all. Students are investing their most valuable asset, their hopes, their dreams, and their time in an education. And they need a promise that works for them. The key words here are for them. In some states, the promise is that they may transfer their credits to at least one of the universities in the system. I believe that's a feature even in North Carolina. What good is that to a student with a full-time job in a particular locality? And I would ask you plainly, if you happen to live, let's just pick a town, Fuquay-Varina. You live in Fuquay-Varina. You're a good, solid 3.2 high school student who says, I think I can go to college, though I'm not sure because nobody in my family ever did before. And you go to Wake Technical Community College, and you're successful. You have a 3.2 GPA there with an Associates of Arts degree. Where are you going to go to college? Where are you going to go? Right? Your transfer consortium is the most promising example I've found in North Carolina. In most counties like that, let's just take the county right next to University of Florida in Gainesville. They're not interested in that student. That student is a full GPA point below the average for their freshman class and never took an SAT or an ACT. Never took one. They're not interested in that student. It's 140 miles to the next state university. What's the option for that student? Must be a value proposition that works for them. Again, the local ecosystem is in a position to fashion a meaningful promise to local students, but they have to do it together. In Central Florida, this promise is called Direct Connect to UCF. It offers a guarantee of admission to any Associate of Arts graduate of the local participating colleges, Valencia included. There are no further conditions. They are in the top 200 most selective institutions in the country, and there are no other conditions. Your AA is all it takes. It's your passport. Bring a crumpled, molded 1982 diploma with a transcript from Valencia, and they must admit you. It's a clear, easy promise to make. It's a little harder to keep. Since implementation in 2005, more than 50,000 transfers to the University of Central Florida from local colleges, half of them from Valencia, have earned bachelor's degrees. 50,000 degrees since 2005. The partnership involves many other elements, but without the guarantee, without the value proposition, all the other efforts would yield at best only incremental improvements in outcomes. I challenge you, visit the websites for your partners and see what the value proposition is. Visit the system level, as I did this morning, the system level website, and search transfer and discern, if you can, from the website what the value proposition is to the student, and ask yourself, would you take them up on this? Third design principle, retention and application of credit. The evidence is very strong here that the most powerful inhibitor to transfer student success after transfer is loss of credit. This can be through complete failure to apply the credit to a degree or application of credits where they don't help and don't move the student closer to a credential, that is, using them only as elective or excess credit. Again, Monaghan and Attewell found that students that have most or all of their credit applied to a degree pathway have more than 2.5 times greater likelihood of graduation than those who have less than half their credit effectively transferred. Further, students who have between half and 89% of their credits transferred have nearly 75% higher odds of graduating. Sorry for all the numbers. But their study also found that only 58% of students were able to apply 90% or more of their credits after transferring, and 14% of the transfer students had fewer than 10% of their credits applied, essentially beginning their program from scratch. In a similar study, Doyle found that transfer of credit affected graduation rates just as powerfully. Some 82% of students able to transfer all their credits graduated within 6 years, compared to 42% who were unable to use all of their credits. Loss of credit has many causes, ranging from late changes to major to curriculum creep to outright bias. The solution is to be found best by close design of curriculum pathways for transferring students, assertive advising and with tools to keep students on track, effective measurement of credit loss and excess credits with their effects on time to graduation made public, and centralization of the resolution of credit transfer issues. This has to be done very thoughtfully. A model that requires a student to go through a 4-month process with 4 levels of appeal is not reasonable. There may be a role for policymaking at the state level in this. The Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board created a field of study advising tools guide. That is, every college had to develop these 42-hour core credits for the major that had to be accepted in block by the universities, but recently reported that only just about 40% of the transfer students actually completed the core before transferring. More recently, as Mimi, who's here, can tell you, the Texas legislature passed legislation, Senate Bill 25, requiring universities to develop recommended pathways for students to all their majors and requiring the universities to report any non-transferable credits to both the legislature and the coordinating board by March 1 of each year. The first part of that requirement exists in North Carolina as well, I believe, to create clear transfer pathways at each of the universities. So I visited again the first 4 alphabetically. I didn't get past the first on this. There were, for Appalachian State, 165 transfer pathways described on the website. I wouldn't figure that out, would you? I wouldn't try to figure that out, but you might. But this second part, reporting non-transferable credits to the legislature, that just sounds like something that could happen in North Carolina to me. I don't think it's a solution. I think it's a shot across the bow, but I don't think it's a solution. We ought to be providing the solution, not letting them try. Perhaps a better approach would be for states that have performance funding models for the universities and community colleges to first assure that their formulas don't impede access through transfer, like measuring time for graduation in ways that ignore the necessity of part-time attendance by community college transfers. And second, to develop thoughtful incentives for institutions to collaborate on improving transfer access and success. It's important, by the way, to focus on both access and success, to avoid perverse incentives to exclude transfer students to improve outcomes. Systems with strong state governance routinely regulate enrollment planning at constituent institutions already. Why not set goals for enrollment of transfers and their success at each institution at the system level? Why not do that? This could even be a collaboration between the state board overseeing universities and the state board overseeing community colleges. A specific, shared, measurable strategic goal to increase economic opportunity by making transfer more effective and increasing the diversity of the graduating classes of the universities and therefore the diversity of the professions. Fourth design principle, value the associate degree. Value the degree. Study after study has found that the completion of an Associate of Arts degree prior to transfer is strongly associated with transfer success through the bachelor's degree. A study in the SUNY system found that students who earned an associate degree prior to transfer had a 20 percentage point higher probability of earning the bachelor's degree within 3 years. Crosstow and Copco found the same 20 percentage point improvement for associate degree holders over transfers with even 60 hours on their transcript, but no degree. Nationally, only 64% of transfers have earned the associate degree prior to transfer, and in some states it's a single-digit figure because the receiving institutions have told the students in no uncertain terms to transfer as soon as possible and take as few courses as they can manage before transferring. The same study found that after propensity score matching, associate degree earners were 92% more likely to earn the bachelor's degree within 4 years than non-degree transfers with 50 to 90 credit hours on their transcript. Clearly, the associate degree matters for transfer student success, yet few universities require it as a prerequisite to transfer. Again, in the Direct Connect to UCF program mentioned above, the guarantee is contingent upon completion of the associate's degree prior to transfer. And this was based on local evidence that the degreed transfers would perform on a par with native students, obviating the need for any other criteria. Within 3 years of issuing the guarantee, the number of Associate of Arts degrees awarded annually by their largest partner, Valencia, increased by 97%. Students are rational. They had a reason to earn the Associate of Arts degree. Is there any other reason? Have you ever seen a job advertised, Associate of Arts required? No. It's a transfer degree. It ought to be required as a part of the transfer process because the evidence is clear. It improves outcomes. Regional transfer ecosystems should develop models that place a heavy value then, from the student's perspective, on earning the associate's degree first. Lastly, next to lastly, identify and address financial barriers to transfer success. This is not discussed very widely. The majority of discretionary financial aid resources, that is, what is outside of Title IV and certain state programs, are oriented almost exclusively to enrollment management models in higher education, which is to say, to freshmen. Programs aimed at assisting transfer students are rare, and even more general programs that are available to transfer students often require full-time enrollment, eliminating most, or many at least, from participating. Yet the economic diversity of transfer students suggests a heightened need for financial assistance. Further, even within programs such as the Pell Grant, policies have often had unintended consequences. For example, academic progress measures sometimes make it impossible for students who may begin with a remedial course or two to complete the full bachelor's degree with financial aid. STEM pathway students, we recently discovered at community colleges, including Valencia, are completing their Associate of Arts degree before they've met all the requirements for the STEM major they're transferring into, making them ineligible for financial aid once the degree is awardable. You don't want to get caught in that audit. If you have students who can meet the AA degree requirements and are staying in your institution to finish organic chemistry at the sophomore level, you're in violation of Title IV, and they will get you. We need a solution to that problem, which is to say, no STEM degree is 2 plus 2 in America today. They're 2.5 plus 2. Who's going to do the half, and how's it going to be funded? Well, we think we've got a little solution to that we could talk about another time. I'll just say for now, it's not quite approved yet, but we're close. We'll call it an advanced transfer certificate. Regional consortia seeking to improve transfer access and completion will want to review the student experience from a financial perspective in detail and figure out what will work for them. Actions such as waiving the application fee. Most universities in North Carolina, it's a $65 application fee for a transfer student. Waiving that, for example, in order to meet a strategic goal of increasing access might be worthwhile. Or finding ways for students to pursue additional prerequisites for which they're no longer eligible for financial aid if they register at the community college as transient students, that is, registered at the university but taking a course or two at the community college, reduces costs, keeps their financial aid intact, and moves them towards graduation. There may be other ways. Local, philanthropically funded, discretionary financial aid needs a strong look. How equitable is that to those 45% who bring credit to their bachelor's degree? Finally, we must understand transfer as a career pathway. In many cases where the core mission of the community college is rooted in a career and technical mission historically, attention to transfer can be viewed as off-mission. This view fails to understand that more than 2/3 of transfer students are pursuing clearly career-oriented bachelor's degrees, and others are pursuing career-oriented advanced degrees through a bachelor's degree that might not appear to be career-oriented. In our experience, more than 1/3 of the students are business transfers. Another third are allied health and education transfers, clearly needed and clearly career-oriented. These are career pathways. It's the rare student who comes to our college and decides, as I tried once in my life, to make a living as a poet or a songwriter. Most know much more clearly where they're headed by the time they get to the transfer process. They are workforce students, and in a workforce where the entry into practice for many of the professions has been and is being raised. Valencia now offers Bachelor of Science in Nursing programs. That was important because we could expand in a way the university couldn't to meet the 1,000 nurse a year deficit in our community. But within 15 years, there'll be no associate degree nursing. Count on it. So when one adds this changing nature of work, the elevation of credentials for entry into practice in those fields, and the general need for baccalaureate-prepared technologists, it seems clear that developing transfer pathways that connect to careers beyond the bachelor's degree should be considered a core mission of a 21st century community college in partnership with local universities. Boards, senior leaders, policymakers need to begin to shape that view and understand and reward colleges for contributing to the worthy goal of diversifying the professions. Valencia's contribution to UCF's graduating class, 1/4 of their graduates, doubles the diversity of their graduating class. I could almost have made only that statement for this speech. Do you understand what I'm telling you? If you care about diversity and equity in this country's future, transfer has to work. It has to work. And it's been proven that it can. And it yields not just diversity in the freshman class, a proxy goal. It diversifies the professions and gives people real economic mobility. So I conclude. These recommendations are not really meant to lead to more tinkering with a system that is hopelessly out of date. The underlying argument is one of real opportunity, economic mobility, diversity and equity, social justice. It's a mandate. It is an inconvenient mandate in a state that's used to making its political pitch around workforce education. It's inconvenient. It is expedient to talk about short-term training, and short-term training is important, and we do a ton of it. But a generation from now, if we have not addressed the transfer problem, we will have failed. Community colleges are not only the largest sector of undergraduate education, they're by far the largest sector serving underrepresented lower economic strata, people of color, first-generation Americans, every other group that you would choose to include in the American dream. Almost 60 years ago, the first widely discussed scholarship on community colleges described their social role as maintaining the status quo, undermining mobility and opportunity by chilling out the aspirations of the underclasses. There are only a few of you here old enough to remember Clark's study in 1960, but it defined the community college discussion for 30 years. It would be a devastating thing to discover now that this claim is supportable. Fortunately, the evidence suggests we might have a chance of making it otherwise. Some scholars are even describing our role as heating up students' aspirations. The potential and the strategic importance of transfer has never been greater for achieving multiple shared goals, and this potential will never be realized unless higher education leaders make the deep redesign of the system across institutional lines at regional and state levels a priority. Thank you to the Belk Center for including me in the conversation tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Shugart, for those very thoughtful remarks. I think we have our work cut out for us. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Lisa Chapman, President of Central Carolina Community College, to deliver the official lecture response. Dr. Chapman has been a pillar of the North Carolina Community College system for nearly 3 decades and has played a critical role in advocating for North Carolina Community College students. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Lisa Chapman to the podium.
So I have typically thought of myself as relatively intelligent. Why in the world did I say I would respond after Sandy talked? And that's, it's not rhetorical. I don't really know why I said that I would do that. But I will tell you this. He's given us a charge, and I think we're up to that charge. His charge is we can do better. And I am the eternal optimist. I believe North Carolina can and will do better. I'm going to talk about a few of the details that we are involved in North Carolina. And Sandy talked about some of them, and some of them he described in ways that I wish he would not have been able to. But reality is reality. So we're going to talk a little bit about where we are and what we can do to do better, because we need to do better. We have, as you indicated, Sandy, a comprehensive articulation model that works for our multiple universities and multiple community colleges, but it can work better. When we revised it in 2014, the CAA was focused on 3 things: supporting current general education requirements at senior institutions, establishing a process for maintaining currency, ensuring current information is universally accessible to students and advisors at both senior institutions and community colleges. That word current comes up a lot, so it needed to remain current. Part of the problem that we had found with the 97 articulation agreement is we didn't change it after 1997. And that's not where we want to continue to find ourselves moving forward. It needed to remain current, but it also, in 2014 with the redesign, was designed to best support the reality of student transfer trends. You talked about we can have a general education block, but Dr. Rawls, if most of the students don't complete that block, nobody gets a lot of value from that. So we needed to reflect the student transfer trends, the reality of that, and also the aspirations of data-informed, most successful, effective transfer experiences for the students, which, as you alluded to, completing the degree. Why do we enroll in a transfer program? That resulted for us in the universal general education courses that we fondly call the UGETC. For those who transferred before completing their associate degree, and it also resulted in that completion pathway, which we call the baccalaureate degree plans, or the BDPs, and those are to be the maps for those students who transfer after completing the degree. And data indicates actually that we are making some progress. The most recent report to the Joint Ed Oversight Committee, and we have to report to them every year on how we're doing, shows more students transferring And an increasing percentage of those students are transferring after completing the associate degree. That's progress. It's not where we need to be, but it's progress. There's a strong correlation, as you indicated, between degree completion prior to transfer and academic performance at the senior institution, and success and access have to go hand in hand, or we're wasting somebody's time and somebody's money. We have a Transfer Advisory Committee, our TAC. We've had the TAC since 1997 as well, but the Transfer Advisory Committee that is composed of university and community college representatives in 2016 did something a little bit different. They established a process, and you alluded to this, for reviewing institutional transfer credit policies and procedures of our UNC system institutions once every 2 years to ensure compliance with the CAA. That review continues to be strengthened, and the reports are being submitted and shared appropriately with our stakeholders. And we'll continue to work on that because we can do better. We can do better by ensuring students begin with the educational end goal in mind, end to end, and ensuring that they are actively engaged in and informed about their options, the expectations, the pathway, and the supports available. And that goes for all of our students, as you indicated. And for us, it's hard work. We have to be intentional. We have to be consistent. Continuing to improve on our students' enrollment and participation. For us in North Carolina, in the ACA 122 College Transfer Success course, in their first semester, not whenever it is convenient for them to take the course, is essential. Engaging in the statewide North Carolina Community College Advising Association and becoming more intentional in our holistic student supports. That's essential. More universally providing and developing co-admission programs like the Chancellor mentioned here at NC State throughout our system. Several of our senior partners have those, but they need to be more universal. And those programs where our students are engaged prior to transfer, supported throughout their educational experience, that's critical. That is critical to the success of our students. Just as importantly, supporting and facilitating consistent communication, and we did some of this a few years ago, among discipline and program majors faculty in our university and their feeder community colleges to ensure alignment of learning outcomes and expectations. That's critical. That's essential. Incentivizing that is critical. That's essential. Ensuring our admissions and programs teams, both university and community college, are consistently communicating so that we can maintain the accuracy, the transparency, the clarity, and the effectiveness of those baccalaureate degree plans. That's essential. That's critical. We're not there yet. We can do better. And that's just talking about working with the model that we have today. What if we enhance that model just a little bit? And I know we're not supposed to tinker, but let's just say we did tinker just a little bit. There are a couple of enhancements we could make to our current model that would address some of the principles that Sandy talked to us about and reduce some of those uncertainties that lead to the inefficiencies in transfer. Just because it transferred as an elective doesn't make it valuable to the student. So what could we do with our current plan? Well, first of all, the timing of the decision regarding acceptance and admission not only into the university, but into the major is critical for our students. If that happens, let's say it occurs by mid-fall of the year prior to expected transfer, then students know what they need to be taking that last semester. That's critical. Developing a common set of 15 semester hour credit among our top transfer majors, or better yet, majors that address top state workforce needs. That would reduce the inefficiencies tremendously because our students wouldn't be looking at a number of baccalaureate degree plans at a number of universities where we've designed the catch-all for them, but they may be taking courses for a major at a university where they didn't get accepted. Two small tinkers in our current plan could reduce the inefficiencies tremendously in our transfer student population. We can also do better by ensuring our Transfer Advisory Committee, our TAC, has the authority and the resources, as well as the charge to hold all of us accountable, the community colleges as well as the universities. Our TAC is a group of very dedicated individuals who have other duties and many other jobs, and they spend a lot of time working to help us know what's going on and to improve on what's going on. We need some resources for them, and we need some support for them, and we need to ensure they have the authority to help us make the right decision. And finally, and very importantly, and this is as important to those of us in the community college system to think about, and you alluded to it, Sandy, as it is to our university partners, we need to embrace lifelong learning. We need to recognize it, we need to act on it, and we need to understand what that means in today's economy. Of the 11,000 plus students that transferred in the fall 2018 in North Carolina into the UNC system, 40% of those who transferred with a degree had earned an associate in applied science. And Bob, you talked about that earlier today in our meeting. 40%. Mary, I finally get it. Our AAS degree is critically important and a critical piece of transfer today in the ecosystem, just as Sandy said. Students with these workforce degrees are transferring. They are being accepted into majors, and we are not serving them in the most effective way possible. We can do better. While we've historically relied on bilateral agreements to facilitate the transfer for these students, these agreements tend to be institution-specific, not always transparent to students who may want or need to transfer that same equivalent credit, because we got a combined course library, same equivalent credit from a different college. And as my colleague, Mark D'Amico states, I don't know, Mark, are you in here? There he is. He's hiding back in the back, too, as well. Rather than focusing on whether to articulate credit, we need to focus on how to articulate credit. And we need to communicate those articulations more broadly, recognizing the value of the AAS not only as an entry-level workforce credential, but also as a piece of the career pathway education in today's economy is an imperative for all higher education partners. As Dr. Herring stated, we should take people from where they are and carry them as far as they can go. But you know what? He didn't define how we should do it. He just said we should do it. And Sandy, he also said, the only valid philosophy for North Carolina is the philosophy of total education, a belief in the incomparable worth of all human beings whose talents, however great or however limited or however different from the traditional, the state needs and must develop to the fullest possible degree. If we don't have economic mobility in North Carolina, we're not going to continue to have economic success. And that economic mobility is only going to happen through our community colleges. North Carolina needs us to do better, and I think we will. Thank you.
We have received a lot of very exciting questions, and I will make a commitment to those of you who responded that we'll continue this conversation and we'll post some of those responses on our website. But we've combined a lot of those questions, and I'm going to ask Sandy if you'd be willing to answer this general question. There were a lot of people interested in where exactly do we start? So you both mentioned a lot of ideas, but where exactly do we start, and who should logically lead?
So there's a couple ways to answer that. Peculiar to North Carolina is one way to answer that, and North Carolina is peculiar. I know you, and some of you are very peculiar, but the history of higher education in North Carolina is difficult to discuss. It is unusual. The structural racism designed into the system in the 19th and early 20th century persists. It's not that the people in leadership are racists, but you have to step back and ask the question of 16 constituent institutions, one of which is an art school. We'll set it aside. At least 15, two of which are serious R1, top of the heap, elite institutions. Set them aside. That leaves 13. 6 of the 13 are HBCUs. This is an interesting thing to have inherited over time. And those HBCUs are wonderful institutions, but they're also a reflection of a history that has a wider footprint than just those institutions. Okay? And I think it makes the conversation really difficult in North Carolina. So, where do I go to school? So let's take another county. Let's take, I think I remember Bladen County is way southeast, right? Way south. Let's say Bladen Tech. I get my associate's degree at Bladen Tech. I'm ready to transfer. Where do I go? Where do I go? You got two choices. Neither one wants you. UNC Wilmington's sense of itself is to become the William and Mary of southeastern North Carolina. They say it out loud. Okay. And I guess it would be UNC Pembroke. They probably do want you. I'm wrong about that. They have a substantial transfer population. So they're probably a decent choice. But let me ask you just honestly in your own heart, consider this. How is that institution considered by the people who live within 100 miles of it? Some love it, some don't. You see why it's hard to talk about? It's just hard to talk about. So outside of North Carolina, much more broadly, my response would be, it's good that the state's doing these things. There are things that only a state can do, things like a common course numbering system, for example, or a common catalog. But most of the heavy lifting is done regionally. Most of the good pragmatic decision-making that can still be made in our country is not made in the national capital. It's not even made in state capitals. It's in the functioning organic communities that are regional in nature, have regional economies, regional talent ecosystems, and regional institutions that know how to work together pragmatically. And I would argue that while the state needs to do its job that the real heavy lifting in most places is going to be done by creating these superstructured organizations around organic institutional relationships where they have decided to measure their worth on the basis of their impact on the communities they were created to serve.